In 1970s Australia, your dad could drive home from the pub half-cut, your mum could smoke in the maternity ward, and you could buy a loose cigarette from the milk bar at age 12, and nobody called the police because none of it was illegal. These weren't fringe activities or back alley secrets. They were just Tuesday, happening in plain sight across every suburb in the country. But here's what I want to know. Which one of these 20 things do you actually remember doing? And did it ever once feel wrong? Picture this. Summer 1974. The outer suburbs of Sydney. The tar on the road is so hot it sticks to the bottom of your thongs when you cross the street. Your dad's EH Holden is idling in the driveway with all 4 doors open because the seats are too hot to sit on yet. And your mum is standing on the front step with a Marlboro Red between her fingers, squinting into the white glare, waiting for your little brother to find his other shoe. The radio inside is playing something tinny through the fly screen door. The whole street smells like cut grass and exhaust and the particular dry heat that only comes in January when the wind is from the west and it means business. You climb into the back, not the seat, the parcel shelf. The long flat bit behind the rear seat and under the back window, the spot that fits one small kid perfectly if they curl their knees up a bit. Nobody tells you to get down. Your dad glances back, nods and reverses out. This is normal. This is just how you go to Nan's place. Your mum winds her window up halfway and lights a second cigarette off the first one. Your little brother falls asleep with his cheek on the seat and one arm hanging down near the floor hump. The Holden smells like vinyl and old smoke and the faint chemical sweetness of the pine tree air freshener hanging off the mirror. You press your palm flat against the rear window and feel the sun through the glass like a warm hand pressing back. Nobody in this car is wearing a seatbelt in the back. There are no seatbelts in the back. This is not an oversight. It is simply how the car was made, and how your family moves through the world, and how every family on your street moves through the world. And it has never once been a conversation anyone has had. You are 8 years old, and you are lying on the parcel shelf of a moving car in 40-degree heat, and you feel, in the most complete and uncomplicated way possible, completely fine. This wasn't just a car trip to Nan's place. This was Australia in 1974. A country that ran on the quiet confidence that things would probably work out. A country where the rules were mostly suggestions, danger was something that happened to other people, and a good Saturday meant your dad had the car washed and your mum had her hair done, and you were out of the house by 10. A country that was, in almost every way you could measure it, genuinely happy with itself. What nobody in that Holden knew, not your dad humming along to the radio, not your mum with her cigarette, not you up on that sun-warm shelf, was that the world they took completely for granted was already changing. One law at a time, one study at a time, one tragedy at a time. And that everything about that Tuesday afternoon drive would one day be unthinkable. But to understand how all of this was normal, you have to understand what Australia actually looked like in the 1970s. Not the postcard version, the real one. The fibro house on a quarter-acre block with the hills hoist out the back and the lemon tree in the corner that nobody watered but somehow never died. The garage smelled like petrol and old newspaper. The kitchen where your mum kept the Mortain under the sink next to the Ajax and the bottle of something brown that might have been vinegar or might have been weed killer and nobody was entirely sure. Your mum ran the house the way a general runs a campaign. She knew where everything was and how much it cost and when it was running low. She bought Omo washing powder in the big box for 89 cents at Woolworths, and she bought the store brand version when money was tighter, and she never once mentioned the difference. She sprayed the kitchen bench with Mortein before she wiped it down because that was how you kept the cockroaches back, and she did it with the window closed because opening the window let the flies in, and nobody told her that the chemicals in that spray were something to worry about because nobody knew yet, and so it simply wasn't something to worry about. Your dad's job on the weekend was the yard and the car, and whatever Barry from 2 doors down needed a hand with. If Barry was pulling out the fibrous sheeting on his laundry extension, your dad was there with a claw hammer and his work boots. Then the white dust floated around both of them in the afternoon light and settled on their hair and their arms, and when they were done they had a cold two-haze and hosed themselves down with the garden hose, and that was the end of it. Fibro was just what houses were made of. Everyone's house was partly fibro. The dust was just dust. The kids existed in a separate world that ran alongside the adult one and touched it mostly at mealtimes and bedtime. You left after breakfast and you came back when the streetlights came on, and nobody in between had any particular responsibility for you. You rode your bike with no helmet because helmets were not a thing that existed in your world except for footballers and racing car drivers. You bought Tom Thumbs and a few bungers from the milk bar for 20 cents, and you lit them in the gutter with a match you'd taken from the box your mum kept on top of the fridge. Mr. Papadopoulos behind the counter sold you 2 loose Escort cigarettes when you said they were for your mum, and maybe they were and maybe they weren't, and he didn't ask twice. At school on Monday, the deputy principal's leather strap sat in the top drawer of his desk like a full stop at the end of a sentence. Everyone knew it was there. Nobody questioned it. That was just how things worked, and how things worked was not yet something anyone your age had learned to argue with. The changes did not arrive with a siren or an announcement. They came the way the season changes. So slowly you barely noticed. And then one day, you looked up and everything was different, and you could not say exactly when it happened. Cracker night went first, or at least it went first for most kids on most streets. It did not end because someone decided fun was dangerous. It ended because every November the burns units at the children's hospital filled up with small hands and small faces, and parents started writing letters to the papers, and the letters became hard to ignore when the numbers were sitting right there next to them in print. Victoria pulled retail fireworks from the shelves in 1982. Other states followed in their own time. The last real cracker night for most Australian families was somewhere in the early 1980s, and you probably remember the exact year your street went quiet in November for the first time. The sky stayed dark. It felt strange for a few years, and then it just felt like November. The drink driving story moved differently. Victoria introduced random breath testing in 1976, and the papers treated it like a genuine shock, which tells you something about how different the world was. Before that, being pulled over after the pub was mostly a conversation, and the conversation usually ended with the officer deciding whether you seemed too drunk or just regular drunk. And regular drunk was generally considered your own business. The road toll in 1970 was 3,798 people dead in a country of 12 million. The number is almost impossible to hold in your head as a real thing. It took the RBT and then the TAC ads in the 1980s that showed you exactly what a windscreen does at speed, and sustained enforcement year after year, before the number started to fall in any serious way. It fell a long way. That part of the story is genuinely good. The asbestos reckoning took the longest and cost the most. James Hardie had been making fibro sheeting, Hardiflex, Harditex, Super 6 in factories at Camellia and Penrith for decades, and thousands of Australian men spent their working lives breathing the dust. The company had research on the health effects sitting in filing cabinets while your dad and Barry were out in the backyard on a Saturday with a claw hammer. Bernie Banton worked at the Camellia plant. He got mesothelioma. He spent years fighting for compensation for himself and the other men, and he was told his claim was approved by phone while he was in palliative care. He died in 2007. The dust from those weekend laundry extensions is still sitting in the lungs of men who are still alive right now. The baby sleep guidelines changed quietly and then all at once. For decades, the advice was stomach down. The research that overturned it arrived slowly through the 1980s, and the public health message caught up in the early 1990s, and the SIDS rate dropped sharply after that. The gap between knowing and telling, measured in years, is not an abstraction. Here is the complicated truth that sits underneath all 20 of those things, and it is worth saying plainly before we get to the end. The 1970s were not a golden age that bureaucrats dismantled for no reason. The evidence is in the mesothelioma wards and the road fatality numbers and the burns unit admission records from every November for 30 years. When you count the bodies first and then make the rules tend to make sense. Seatbelts work, helmets work. No random breath testing works. The baby sleep guidelines that were reversed in the early 1990s saved thousands of small lives that would otherwise have simply stopped in the night with no explanation and no warning, and no way for a parent to have known any difference. The regulations that feel like intrusions almost always exist because someone stood in a room somewhere and counted something that could not be uncounted. But there was something real about that world that the statistics do not fully capture, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. It was the texture of unsupervised time, the specific weight of a Saturday that belonged entirely to you from after breakfast until the streetlights came on. Oh, the way the whole street smelled like leaf smoke on an autumn afternoon, when every backyard had a pile burning at the same time, and the sky went that particular flat grey by 3 o'clock. The back fence conversations between neighbours who did not need a reason to talk to each other because the fence was right there, and so would you. The sense that life was something you moved through with your actual body, in actual heat, with actual risk, and that the moving was the point. You can hold both of those things at once. You are allowed to know that the lead paint on the cot rail was genuinely dangerous and still feel something real when you remember the specific weight of a wooden toy from that era, the smoothness of it, the solidness of it, the way it smelled like something you cannot name but would recognize immediately. You are allowed to know that drink driving kills people and still remember something warm and specific about a Friday night before any of that existed. Nostalgia is not the belief that the past was better. It is the recognition that it was real and that you were in it, and that being in it made you who you are. Somewhere there is a photograph. It is probably slightly overexposed the way photos from the 1970s always are, everything a little washed out at the edges. In it, your family is in the back of a ute at a country show, or standing in the backyard on cracker night with sparklers, or piled into the Holden for the drive to Nan's place. Nobody's wearing a helmet. Your mum probably has a cigarette on. Your dad looks about 25 and completely certain that everything is going to be fine. You are squinting into the sun and you look, in the most uncomplicated way possible, happy. That photograph is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of a particular kind of Australian life that moved at a different speed, under different assumptions, with a confidence that was sometimes badly wrong and sometimes, just sometimes, exactly right about the things that mattered most. We got safer, we got better, in ways that can be measured and should be counted. And we lost the back of the ute, we lost the smoke of November, we lost Saturday and the streetlights and Mr. Papadopoulos at the milk bar who never asked too many questions. That is not a complaint, it is just a full accounting, and you were there for it. Do you remember the exact smell of a sparkler on a November night? And that hot metal and smoke smell that exists nowhere else in the world? Do you remember the feeling of the wind in the back of a ute on a dirt road? Was there a jart set in your backyard? And did anyone actually get hurt? And which one of these 20 things surprised you most? Because you genuinely did not know it was gone, or because you still cannot believe it was ever normal in the first place? Share your story in the comments below. Every one of those stories is a piece of Australian history that will not exist anywhere else. And if this brought back memories, please subscribe to keep these memories alive.